Okay, hi everyone. I think we're still 2 people down, but seeing as it's 10 o'clock, I think we'll get started. Oh, another person's just joined. Just give them a second. Do you just want to pop in the chat to me now if you can see a screen that says gas exchange, and also a little photo of me in the bottom talking to you now? Okay, you can't see me, but you can see me, but you can't see the screen. Right. For me, the screen is.
Can you hear now?
Yeah.
I've unmuted it.
It's going down. Yes, that button's going down.
Right. I'll try again.
Yeah.
Mom, this is section 1, test 1. This is section 1, test 2. This is section 1, test 3.
Okay, can anyone see this screen now? Yeah, you can see that. It says gas exchange. Oh, great. That's perfect. Right, let's start. Okay, so today we're learning about gas exchange. Hopefully, you are aware of that. So let's move on. So just a bit about me first. So I'm Hannah and I'm a third year medical student at the University of Leeds. So I'm about halfway through my medical degree now, which is a bit scary. Oh, it's disappeared again. Is everyone having that problem, or what's it look like for everyone else? Oh. What about now? I'll try this way one more time. If it's not working, there's another way we can try. How's this? Right, let's see if this works. Okay, just message me if it's stopped working again. That'd be great. Thank you. So yeah, I'm Hannah at the University of Leeds. Oh. Let's try it this way. Right, you should be able to see my screen now. How's this looking for everyone? Can you see my screen? Should be able to see the chat popping up. Okay, that's great. Let's go for it. So a little fun fact about me. I'm from the Lake District originally, and instead of having a pet dog or a pet cat or something, I have got 3 pet sheep. So let's get started with today's lesson. So this is the breakdown of what's going to happen today. So we're going to have about 3 45-minute lessons, and then we'll have 15-minute breaks in between each of these. So those breaks are really important so that you're not getting too tired and we can stay focused, because I'm going to be asking you questions as we go through this, just to check your understanding as we go, just to make sure, see where you all are at with your understanding. So just check the chat to make sure you all can still see. Yeah. Okay, so how does this work? So I want you guys to be asking me questions. If you feel at any point that you're not sure what's going on, please just pop a message in the chat, and I'll pick it up at some point. Because I'm now having to share my screen a bit like this, I'll have to keep flicking back across to look at the chat box. So I'll just do that periodically throughout just to make sure you're all okay. We've got a few practice exam questions in there as well, just to check your understanding, and also really helps to apply what you've learned into an exam sort of question, just to see if you're picking up those marks. We have a few fun facts thrown in there throughout, and yeah, as I said, please just ask me at any point if you need any help with anything. So the areas we're going to cover today is, first off, what is the respiratory system? What is ventilation? How does gas exchange occur? Exercise and anaerobic respiration. And then finally, the effects of asthma and smoking. So taking what you've learned and then applying that in a real life sort of clinical context and seeing how that can affect people's lives. So what is the respiratory system? Does anyone have any ideas, want to put some messages in the chat about what you think the respiratory system is made up of, what components there are? Just flip back to the chat. The way we breathe, absolutely, yeah, that's a really good point. Any other ideas? Anyone have? What about different components that we... What about different components of the respiratory system? So we obviously have different things like the lungs, which you can see just outlined here. I'm just drawing my mouse around that. Hopefully you can see that. And then also we have the trachea as well. So that's going right down the middle, just there. But we'll look at these a bit more in depth in a minute. So that was just a brief introduction. So now we'll start off by trying to label this diagram, because it's really useful if you have a good understanding of the anatomy and how the respiratory system is made up. So then you can sort of start to apply it into real life and exam questions. So if we start off with this very first label at the top here, and pointing at that red tube, what do you think that's called? Does anyone have any ideas? Just pop that in the chat box. Yep, that is absolutely perfect. Straight away, the trachea, you're right. So, excuse my writing. It's quite difficult to write on this iPad. That's perfect, well done. So the second label down, it's pointing to that little white sort of balloon shaped thing. Does anyone have any idea what that might be called? Any ideas? Just want to pop it in the chat box. You might have come across it before. No? So, oh, the lungs. So as a whole, absolutely right. That is pointing at the lungs. But it's more, I don't know if you can quite see the diagram as clearly, but more specifically, it's pointing at that tiny little balloon shaped things. And so they're called, let me get my pen to work. Any ideas yet? No. That is called alveoli, or a singular one would be called alveolus. There you go. So they're tiny little air sacs inside the lungs. So the next arrow down, just below these alveoli, there's these sort of trunk-shaped things. Does anyone have any idea what they might be called? You just want to pop it in the chat. Absolutely, that's really well done. Yep, you're right. Bronchioles. So those bronchioles connect to the alveoli. So if we're getting a little bit bigger, what is the next arrow pointing to? Any ideas? Sorry, I've just lost the chat. So there we go. Bronchus, absolutely, well done. So you've got bronchus, which is the bigger version, and then the bronchus, or bronchi for plural version. So you've got 2 bronchi. These branch down into much smaller bronchioles. Well done. So does anyone have any idea what the next arrow is pointing to? Any guesses? Alveolus, not quite, the one just below. So we're now sort of looking outside of the lungs. So yeah, outside of the lung space. Yeah, perfect. We're looking at the ribs. So your ribs surround your lungs, and we'll go on to that reason later on. But these little white knobbly bits going around the outside of the lungs. So that's like you've cut the ribs sort of down and you're looking at the ribs. So next line down, this one's a little bit harder. So these are the little red things in between the ribs. What do you think they might be? Yep, absolutely. Intercostal muscles. Perfect. Yeah, thank you. So anyone can answer questions. As soon as you know the answer, pop it in the chat box. That'd be great. Now, underneath that, so we've got this line which sort of is going in a dome curved shape. Does anyone know what those might be? Well, that thing might be. Just want to pop it in the chat box. Any ideas? No ideas what that is? So it's a bit of a clue. It's a really big muscle that sits underneath your lungs. Yeah, perfect. And that's not a bad spelling of it either. It's quite a difficult word to spell. I don't know if you just accidentally put that S in by accident. There you are. So that's diaphragm. Bit of a weird spelling, but once you've learnt it, then it should be all right. And then, so we've got the very last point now. What do you think that is? So it looks like it's just tucked behind the lungs. You can only see part of it. What do you think it might be? Any ideas? It's really essential for you as a person to live and survive. I'll give you a clue. It involves blood. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So it's the heart. So the heart just tucked ever so slightly behind there. So you can only see a very small part of it. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. That was really good. Thank you everyone for contributing there. So, oh, and there's the answers. If you can see them written out a bit nicer than I wrote them out. There you go. So, next slide. Quick question for you all before we move on. If you all just want to send me your answer, hopefully the messages should just be going to me now instead of to everyone. So you can't see what other people have answered to this question. Which of these is not part of the respiratory system? A, B, C, or D? So A, the lungs, B, the trachea, C, the bronchioles, or D, the liver? Hopefully you should have a bit more of an idea now that we've just run through those questions, the labeling of the diagram a minute ago. So you just want to send your answers to me. Yep, I've got a couple of answers coming in. Any more answers? Any more answers, guys? Not yet. Thank you. I'll just give you another few seconds, see if anyone else has any ideas. Yeah, thank you. Okay, that's great. So all of you right there, you've all said the liver. So that's option D, not part of the respiratory system. It's an essential part of the GI anatomy and your tummy, but not part of the respiratory system. So you're all right, correct. Let's move on to the next slide. There we go, just to highlight that. So the trachea. This is also known, what you might have heard as our windpipe. So that's sort of a more common term that people tend to call it. And in its walls, it has these called cartilage rings. And I'll just point to them there. It's these cream colored rings that you can see just going down. So cartilage is quite a hard substance. It's not bone, but it's still quite hard. And that's going to really help support the structure of the trachea and keep it open. And why do you think it's important that the trachea stays open all the time? What do you think? You want to pop in the chat why you think it's important that these cartilage rings are there? Any ideas? Yeah, so I've got one so you can breathe, absolutely. So if your trachea is not open, you're not going to be able to get air in and out. So I had one saying allows the trachea to expand to a certain shape. So it's not necessarily a trachea that's going to expand. We'll come on to what's expanding in a minute. But the main reason is just to keep it open and just to let air go in and then to let air flow back out again. And as well as this, you've got these muscle rings as well that's supporting in between each of these cartilage rings. So your trachea is a mix of cartilage rings and then rings of muscle too. And you can see that stripy appearance all the way down. So now, like we saw on the diagram before, your trachea, which is this big tube in the middle, which I'll just highlight, this thing and yet that I've just highlighted with yellow, is going to branch into two different tubes. And these are the bronchi. So you've got two bronchi coming from your trachea. And then, as you said before as well, these bronchi gradually get smaller and smaller and branch off into these other branches. And these are your bronchioles. So you've got trachea to bronchi to bronchioles. So that order getting smaller each time. So your trachea is the biggest tube, bronchi is second biggest, and then your bronchioles are a lot smaller. And then that's just a little reminder. So if you've got, talking about one bronchus, it ends in US. But if you're talking about both of them, it now ends in I. So it's bronchi if you're talking about both. So how many lungs do you think we have? Quite an easy question. What do you think? Two, absolutely right, yes. So you've got a right lung and you've got a left lung. And each of these lungs has this special membrane that wraps around both of them on either side. A bit like a sort of cling film that wraps around your lungs. So this now is just a really good animation to show you the action of your lungs. So lungs are, you can imagine them to be a bit like balloons. So if you look at these little blue, light blue dots that are coming when they move in now and then move out, that's, imagine it's your air moving in and out of your lungs. So when you breathe in and the air moves in, the balloons are going to inflate and they're going to get bigger. And then when you breathe out and the air leaves your lungs and leaves your mouth, the balloons are going to deflate and get smaller again. I'm sure you've all blown up a balloon at some point in your life, and that is a really good way of imagining what your lungs are like and what they're doing as you're breathing in and out. And then we've got this muscle that I mentioned before, which has got a funny spelling, but the diaphragm. Now, that is represented on here by this green line, which is moving up and down, a bit like a dome shape. So that's going to sit just below the lungs. And as I said, it's a muscle. And I don't know if you can see on this, as the diaphragm moves up and becomes more dome shaped, the lungs above are getting smaller. And then when the diaphragm becomes a bit more flat and less of a dome, the lungs have more space and they get bigger. So the lungs are really important for, the diaphragm, sorry, is really important for helping the lungs to get bigger and then get smaller again, which are both needed to get air into your lungs and then to get air back out again. So before we move on, I just want to check everyone feels okay. Has anyone got any questions at this point? If you want to pop any of them in the chat before we move on. Give you a few seconds. No, I've not got any questions. Pop them in at any point if you do have a question as we go along, but I'll continue for now. So talking about these alveoli, these are those tiny little sacs inside your lungs, and let's pop that there. So these tiny little sacs in your lungs that we pointed at before. So if you can look on this diagram over here, they're the tiny little round things at the end of the tubes. So what do you think alveoli are important for? What happens in the alveoli? It's a really important process. And yeah, I've had one answer, which is exactly right. Any other answers? If you're paying attention to the first slide, it's the name of this presentation we're doing today. Yeah, so I've had a few good answers there. So absolutely right. Alveoli, the site of gas exchange. So we're going to talk more about the gas exchange in more detail later. But the alveoli are absolutely vital to get really good gas exchange taking place. Okay, we've got our first exam question. So quite a nice question to do, bit of sort of a multiple choice thing. So in list A, it's got some structures in the human body. So we've got the alveoli and we've got the ribs. And then in list B, we've got some functions of some structures in the body. So surround and protect the lungs, filter the blood, carry blood towards the heart, absorb digested food, and allow oxygen to enter the blood. And what this question is asking you to do is draw a straight line from each of the structures in list A to the correct function in list B. So if you're answering this question, you want 2 lines, one from alveoli to a function and one from ribs to a function. So if you all just want to send me a message in the chat and tell me what you think you would draw a line from the alveoli to and what you would draw a line from the ribs to. I'll give you a minute or so just to have a think and send me what your answers are. So I've had a couple of answers. It's looking good so far. the answers that I've had are right. So if everyone else wants to drop in what they think as well. So these messages are only going directly to me, so no one else will be able to see what you're answering. So don't worry about whether you're getting it right or wrong. That's the whole point of today and the whole point of practicing questions. Another 30 seconds or so. Yeah, that's really good. So I've got some good answers there. So everyone who's answered is saying that they would draw a line from alveoli to allow oxygen to enter the blood. Absolutely. And the ribs, they would draw a line to surround and protect the lungs. So that's really good. That's an easy, probably a mark or something for that question, or maybe 2 marks. Yeah, well done. Next slide. So now we're going to look at how we get air actually in and out of the lungs, which is their main function. So does anyone know what the process of air moving in and out of your lungs is called? Just want to send me a message in the chat. So I've got an answer through saying diffusion. That is a really good answer, and we'll definitely come on to diffusion in a little bit. And that's to do with the gas exchange that we were talking about before. But on a more general term, it begins with the letter V, and it's just about the actual action of getting the air in and then the air back out again. Any ideas from anyone beginning with a V? Yep, got the right answer through just then. So this is called ventilation. So ventilation is the process of getting air in and then being able to remove it as well and breathe it out. So when we take a breath in, we're inhaling, and then when we take a breath out, we're exhaling. So this diagram on this animation, on the right, is really good. So as you can see, inhaling, the lungs are getting bigger, diaphragm's flattening, and the lungs are full of air. And then you're exhaling and the diaphragm becomes more domed, lungs get smaller, ribs get smaller, and the air's pushed out. So don't worry too much yet if you can't remember that. We're going to go into much more detail now, but that's just a really useful animation. It shows it really well. So when we take a breath in, there's a few things that happen, and the purpose of this is you want to try and make the volume inside your rib cage as big as possible, because if you make it nice and big, then air is going to be drawn into the lungs. The air from outside is going to want to get into all that nice space inside your lungs. So in order to do that, something has to happen to the diaphragm. Now, what do you think the diaphragm does? Bearing in mind it's a muscle, and so muscles tend to contract or relax. Which do you think the diaphragm does when we breathe in? Just want to send me a message. Does know is sort of guess. So I've had a good answer already. Oh, a couple of good answers. You're right. So the diaphragm's going to contract, and the action of contracting pulls the diaphragm down, so it moves down. Just draw that on. So the diaphragm, is gonna move down. That arrow's not very good color, but hopefully you can see that. So diaphragm's contracting and moving down is the first thing. Now, do you remember we talked about those intercostal muscles before? So these are those red marks just here, I'm highlighting in between the ribs. And these are also muscles. and they're going to contract as well. So the action of that pulls the ribs up and out like this on both sides. So now you've got the diaphragm contracting, moving down, intercostal muscles contracting, pulling the ribs up and out. Next is what I said before. So with all this movement out, the volume inside here where the lungs are in the middle is going to become much bigger. And what happens to the pressure if the volume in there is getting bigger? Do you think the pressure in there is going to increase, or do you think it's going to decrease? Just want to drop me a message. Yep, I had a right answer. What do you think? So if volume's getting bigger, what do we think would happen to pressure? Any more answers? I've had a couple. I've had one for decrease and one for increase so far. Okay, so the pressure is actually going to decrease because if you don't have to worry about this too much, but it helps to understand it a bit. If you are making this volume bigger inside the lungs, so you're making all of this space where the lungs are so much bigger by the ribs all going out, all the ribs going out and the diaphragm going down, you're going to end up with way less pressure inside here because you've got a much bigger space for everything that's already in there. Now it's got room to spread out even more. So you're going to decrease the pressure. And it's this pressure decrease that's going to pull air from outside inside the lungs. That's your air going in. So volume increases, pressure decreases, air is pulled, drawn into the lungs. So that's the process of breathing in. Anyone have any questions at this point? You just want to send me them in the chat. Okay, if not, we can continue. Now let's looking at breathing out. So it's basically the opposite process of breathing in, which is useful when trying to remember what's happening. So if the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles were contracting when we breathe in, they're now going to do the reverse when we breathe out. So they're going to now relax. So there we go. The diaphragm relaxes. The intercostal muscles relax. So, and this causes the diaphragm to move up this time because it's nice and relaxed. So it's not pulling down. It's going to move up and relax. And then these intercostal muscles are going to let the ribs move in as well because they're nice and relaxed now too. Nothing pulling them out or up. So with everything now moving in towards the lungs, you're going to get this decrease in volume inside. So the space where the lungs are sitting is now going to get a lot smaller. And then like we said before, the pressure is going to increase. So now with a decrease in volume, you get an increase in pressure because everything inside that space from before is now being pushed into a much smaller space. So that's going to really increase the pressure. Any questions? So that forces air out of the lungs because it doesn't want to be somewhere where it's getting squashed and squished inside the lungs. It's going to want to go somewhere it can be free, and it can be a lot more free outside in the atmosphere. So the air moves from the lungs up your trachea and out into the atmosphere. Does anyone have any questions about either of those, breathing in or breathing out? It's one of those things where once you remember the process of it, it comes to you quite easily once you understand it, but it's just remembering these vital steps that happen. So what happens to the diaphragm, what happens to the intercostal muscles, and then as a result, what happens to the volume and pressure inside your lungs. So a quick question just to check that everyone's keeping up with what's going on. and that you're all still listening. So what is going to happen when we breathe in? Is it A, the diaphragm relaxes? Is it B, the volume of the rib cage decreases? Is it C, the pressure in the chest increases? Or is it D, the diaphragm contracts? What do we think? That's good. I've had an answer already, which is correct. What do you all think? Anne had 3 correct answers now. I'll give you another few seconds. Yep, so you're all absolutely right. Sorry, that was me knocking over my water bottle. So you're all right. It was D, the diaphragm is going to contract. So this answer here, diaphragm contracts. And that contraction is going to pull the diaphragm down, increase the volume inside your space where your lungs are, and that's going to help to draw air in. So how do we get air in and out of the lungs? So this is just going to be a quick recap, some more questions. So what happens to the diaphragm when you inhale? We've just said this right now, so this should be nice and quick. Just pop a message to me. Any answers? What is going to happen to it? Is it going to contract or is it going to relax on inhalation? Yeah, perfect. And so what's going to happen when you're then exhaling? What's the diaphragm going to do? Is it going to contract or relax? Exactly. Perfect. So it's going to contract and move downwards on inhalation. And then the opposite, exhalation, it's going to relax and move upwards. So you can see that in the diagram on the right. It's the diaphragm's much more domed. Next one, the intercostal muscles. Are they going to contract or relax on inhalation? So breathing in. What do you think? I've had a couple of answers. So think about you wanting, yeah, had a right answer. You wanting them to contract so that they pull the ribs out, which is going to increase the volume. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, contract. So then opposite, what's going to happen on exhalation with the intercostal muscles? Perfect, yeah. They're going to relax. And then that's going to let the ribs move back down and inwards and increase the pressure to force air out. So the volume of the rib cage on inhalation, is that going to increase or is it going to decrease? What do you think? So the volume inside your ribs, inside your rib cage, when you breathe in, do you want the space to increase or do you want it to decrease? Absolutely, yeah. You want the space to increase. That's going to draw the air in. So then, as we've said before, the opposite is true of exhalation, and the volume's actually going to decrease. So there you are. Then, because the volume's increased in inhalation, what's going to happen to the pressure? What do you think? Is that going to increase or is that going to decrease? Yeah, perfect. That's going to decrease. So for exhalation, the pressure is therefore going to increase. Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, perfect. Increase, so movement of air, inhalation, what direction is the air going to go? What do we think? Where's it going to go? Into the lungs or out of the lungs? Inhalation. Outside to inside. Absolutely. So exhaling moves from inside the lungs to outside the lungs. So that's really well done. Lots of you answering the questions then. So that's showing me you've understood. So we can measure our breathing rate, which is your inhalation and your exhalation. And we do that by counting how many times you breathe in 1 minute. So how many times do you think you breathe in a minute? How many times do you think you inhale and then exhale? You've probably never counted it before. It's one of those things, as soon as you start thinking about your breathing, you now can't stop thinking about it, and you start doing it not automatically anymore. But how many times do you think normally in a minute, how many breaths do you think you take? Just any guess, whatever you think. Any number, I'll give you a clue, it's below 50. 36? Not quite, a tiny bit lower than that. So yeah, 22, much closer. So we normally take around 20 breaths each minute. So that would be classed about normal. So I guess that's not that many. So what do we think makes our breathing rate go up? So what sort of things, if you just want to pop it in the chat box quickly, is going to make you start breathing a lot faster? Exercise, absolutely, yeah, that's a big one. What else? Any other ideas? Nervous, absolutely, yeah, that's really good. So if you're anxious, that's going to also make you breathe a bit faster as well. And you can think about things like people having panic attacks, stuff like that. Often you would see them start to breathe quite a bit faster. So I've had talking also, yeah, you probably would start breathing faster. I guess just because you're using more energy to talk. And I've had a heart attack as well. So in a more broad sense, when you're generally unwell, you do breathe faster. It's just a response to when your body's not so good. You tend to breathe a lot quicker. And it's one of the ways in hospital you could see if someone was unwell, they might be breathing quite fast. So in the opposite direction, what do you think makes breathing slow down? Any ideas? Just want to pop them in. Yeah, that's a really good one, that. When you are calm or tired. So relaxation, relaxing, yeah, absolutely. That's a big one. That'll make you breathe nice and slow. Concentration, yeah. Again, that's a bit like relaxation if you're really sort of in the zone. And again, sleeping, also relaxing too. So they're all really good points. A couple of other ones, if you've got some sort of muscle problem, that might actually stop you being able to breathe as well. And so you're going to breathe a lot slower, just because it's more effort for you to move your lungs. And also if someone has chest pain, they might also breathe slower because it's physically painful for them to breathe in and out, and it's hurting for them to do so. All right, a couple of exam questions just to quickly go through. So our lungs help us to breathe, and the image below shows the human breathing system. And I just want you to tell me what part A is. Though it's pointing to those little sacs. Yep, had a couple of good answers in already. Any more? So this is pointing to the alveoli. Well, you could have alveolus or alveoli. Technically it is pointing to two of them, so that would be alveoli, which is the plural, but they are allowing you to have alveolus. And it's interesting to see as well, if you look below, there also would allow you to have air sacs, but I wouldn't recommend using that in any exam. It's much better if you use the keyword that you've learned. But if you were sat in the exam and you were struggling and you sort of knew what they were, knew what they did, and the only thing you could think of was air sacs, couldn't quite remember the technical keyword, put something down anyway. But yeah, well done to those of you that got alveolus. And also give one function of the ribs. Just quickly send that in the chat to me. Yeah, so I've had protects the lungs. That's a good point. Protect the heart, also true, yeah. So the options that they've given, protection of the lungs / heart, so you both get an answer for that, those of you that answered. And it also helps you breathe and inflate the lungs. So as we were looking at before, when the ribs are pulled up and out, that's going to help you inhale. And then when the ribs then move back in, that's going to help you exhale. So we've got sort of 2 jobs there. So there is a special device that you can use to help measure your breathing. And that is called a spirometer. So it's that word in the end written in red. So that involves, go on to the next slide. So that involves someone breathing into a mouthpiece, and that's going to connect to a computer, and it's going to create what they call a trace on the computer. And it's a sort of digital and more accurate measure of how much air is being inhaled and then how much air is being exhaled in one breath. So let's have a quick look at what a trace might look like. So what this spirometer might produce. So if we look here, we've got something called the tidal volume. So this tidal volume is just the normal amount of air that's breathed in with each normal breath. So it's highlighted on this graph here, between this pink line up here and this pink line down here. So this blue space in the middle is a tidal volume. And for an average person, that's about 500 milliliters, about half a litre. So your normal breathing now will probably be about that. Next, we have what's called the inspiratory reserve volume. So every time you take a normal breath in, the inspiratory reserve volume is that extra amount of air that you can then breathe in afterwards. So if you were to take a normal breath in now with me, normal breath in, and then try and take an extra breath in and see how much extra you can fill your lungs with air, that's what's called as your inspiratory reserve volume. And that's the maximum amount of additional air you can get into your lungs. And as you can see, it goes all the way up to this pink line at the top. And it goes from the top of your tidal volume. Just here. So from there to there. Next, we've got the expiratory reserve volume. So your expiratory reserve volume is the opposite of inspiratory reserve volume. So it's after you've breathed out normally, it's that extra bit of air that you can force out of your lungs. So if you now breathe out with me, just normally, and then try and force as much air out as you can, that would be your expiratory reserve volume. So it's from the bottom of your tidal volume here, which is your normal breath, down to that line at the bottom. And then the last thing is something called the residual volume. So this is after you've done that normal breath out, and then you've done your second breath out and tries to squeeze as much air out as possible, which is your expiratory reserve volume. You've then got this tiny bit of volume left at the end, and that's what's called your residual volume. And that is the amount of air that's left in your lungs that you physically cannot breathe out. But that's really, really important because that air is going to keep the lungs partially inflated. Because if there's no air inside there, they'll deflate, and that can damage the lungs. So it's sort of a protective mechanism that. Has anyone got any questions about those? We have got one more question for you all to answer, and then we can have a break for 15 minutes. So if you think of any questions during the break, please just pop them in the chat box and I can answer them after the break as well. So last question before I let you all go for 15 minutes. What is the tidal volume? So we've just run through it there, and I know it was quite quick, but do you think it's the amount of air breathed in with each normal breath? Do you think it's the amount of air that can be forced out of the lungs? Is it the amount of air left in the lungs after each breath? Or is it none of these? Tidal volume. If it helps jog your memory, it was the very first one I mentioned. Any ideas? Doesn't matter whether you get it right or wrong, because we'll talk about it in a sec. Okay, so I've had a couple of answers saying C, and then I've had one answer saying none. So let's talk about that. So C is the amount of air left in the lungs after each breath. So not quite right. It's close to being right, but one of the words isn't quite correct. So the correct answer is in fact air, the amount of air breathed in with each normal breath. Because if we go back to that graph here, so the amount of air breathed in with each normal breath, it was this sort of space here. It was this space, this blue space in the middle. And that's you breathing in a normal breath. And so on average, you would take in 500 milliliters of air, so about half a litre. Yeah, there isn't a term for, oh no, yeah, no, there isn't a term for the amount of air breathed out, amount of air left in the lungs after each breath. Because then after you've breathed out a normal breath, you would then call the expiratory reserve volume what the extra amount of air you could breathe out is. So tidal volume is what you breathe in normally. Just now, whilst we're sat down, you're breathing in and out, and you're breathing in about half a litre or so of air each time. So I hope that makes sense. We can, if you've got any questions about any of these definitions, which I'm just flicking through now, please just pop them in the chat as we're on a break, but I'll give you a break now of 15 minutes. So we'll come back just about 11:05. So if you can be back in here 11:05, that would be great. But feel free to go and stretch your legs for a bit now. Get something to eat, get something to drink, think of any questions you have, and then we'll come back in a little bit. Okay, so it's 5 past. Hopefully you've all returned from your break. Do you want to just pop a message in? Just say yes or hi or something, just to let me know that you're all back. And then we can get started again. Hi, thank you. That's great. So I see there's a few of you here. So we'll get started and then we can get through it a bit faster. So we've looked at the structure of the lungs as a whole, really, and sort of the anatomy of the lungs in this first part. So now we're going to move on to more specifically what's going on in a lot smaller detail in terms of gas exchange. So basically, gas exchange is happening all of the time. It is a constant process that's happening. And as we mentioned before, it's happening in your alveoli, so those tiny little air sacs. And what, just a quick question to start off. What are the alveoli attached to? So what are the tubes called that the alveoli are attached to? Just want to drop a message to me. Bit of a recap from what we went over before. Yep, so I've had one right answer so far. One. Yep, so the alveoli attach to those smaller tubes called the bronchioles. And you can just see part of the bronchiole here. That's a bronchiole and that's a bronchiole. So you basically have oxygen that you're breathing in, along with a mixture of other gases, but it's oxygen that you want. And your body is going to produce carbon dioxide, which you want to remove from your body. It's not very good for you. So you're going to breathe that out. So you've got oxygen moving in here, following that orange arrow into this blood capillary here. And carbon dioxide that's in your blood doesn't want to be there anymore. So it's going to move back across into your alveoli, and then it's going to move up out here and you're going to breathe that out. So what is the process called where oxygen moves through the wall of the alveolus and then through the wall of the capillary, and the same process that the carbon dioxide moves the opposite direction? What's that process called? Mentioned it very, very briefly before. How does it move across? What's that process called? Yep, I've had a right answer. Anyone else? Give you a few more seconds to have a think. So yeah, that's right. So that process is called diffusion. So that's just the oxygen is going to diffuse from the alveolus into the blood capillary, and then the carbon dioxide is going to go the opposite direction and diffuse from the capillary into the alveolus. So that's great. And these alveoli are really well suited to do this gas exchange and allow this diffusion of the gases to happen. Now, does anyone know there's 3 main things that make them really good for gas exchange? I just want you all to send me as many that you know of, any that you know of. What makes the alveoli really, really good for gas exchange? What do you think? Just drop me a message. Any ideas? So thinking about, I'll give you some hints. So what about the, yep, so I've had an answer through. Covered in capillaries. So that's definitely one of the answers. There's an awful lot of blood capillaries that are surrounding these alveoli. And so that means that there are lots of different opportunities for this gas exchange to take place between the capillaries and the alveoli. And yep, I've had another right answer. So there's a really big surface area. So if you look at these alveoli, which are sort of balloon shaped, there's all that edge all along there, which the capillary is wrapping around for gas to move across. So gas, oxygen can move across that, and carbon dioxide can move across that in lots and lots of area. And so there's lots of space for that to happen. And then there's just one last thing, which is to do with the walls. Yep, I've had a right answer through. Anyone else? Anyone else know why what is good about the walls and alveoli? Absolutely, yes. I've had a good answer through. Anyone else? No, not too sure. So yeah, I've had a right answer through. So the walls are extremely thin. It's sort of shown on this diagram, really thin blue line, and the same with the capillary. The walls are very, very thin, so there's not a very big distance that the gases have to travel. So it's really easy for them to move across and through these walls. Okay, so there you go, thin walls, lots of blood capillaries, large surface area. What's good about the wall? Yeah, so the walls are really, really thin. That's what's good about them, yeah. So let's do an exam question on these alveoli, just to check that you've understood what we've just talked about. So the question's asking you to give 2 ways that the lungs are adapted for efficient exchange of gases. And then they want you to describe how each adaptation helps to maintain efficient gas exchange. So they've been nice and they've given you a little diagram of some of these alveoli, and they've also shown the bronchiole as well and labeled the blood vessels. So they've done a nice labeled diagram for you that might help jog your memory of some of the things. And we just talked about 3 adaptations, but they're only asking for 2. So that also makes the question quite nice. So what do we think? Do you want to drop me a message, an adaptation, and then how I want you to describe it and how it helps gas exchange take place? What do we think? So it's one of the things we just mentioned before. There were 3 things. So that's an easy mark. If you put 2 adaptations down, that's 2 marks. Yep, having some answers in now. What else? And if you can, tell me why that adaptation is really good. So why does it help gas exchange? Okay. Yeah, so I've had one which says that the walls are thin and the thin walls help the gases to diffuse easier. So definitely get a point for the walls are thin. You might just need to be a little bit more specific about why that's good. Just in terms of the fact that mentioning that they don't have very far to travel, the distance isn't very big, and that would get you your 2nd point for that. And let's just have a look at some of the other ones as well. So there's many alveoli, and that provides a large surface area. So that would get you 2 points. There's good blood supply to maintain a steep diffusion or concentration gradient. There's thin walls, so the gases don't have very far to travel. And well ventilated, and that also will maintain that concentration gradient. So you've got lots of oxygen coming in, so it's going to want to diffuse across and get into the blood capillaries. So hopefully that's all right. Next exam question just wants you to tell them what type of blood vessel X is. So they've given you a diagram, they've highlighted a blood vessel X, which goes all the way around here. And it's going all the way around one of these alveoli, which is here in the middle. So what type of blood vessel do you think X is? Is it an artery? Is it a capillary? Or is it a vein? What do you think? Just give you a few seconds. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, because only I can see your answers. So just whatever you think it is. Yeah, so I've had a few answers through now. Most of them are right. So in this case, it's a capillary. had an answer saying it was an artery. And the reason it wouldn't be an artery is because arteries are much, much bigger blood vessels. So you've got really big arteries in your body, and they've got quite thick walls as well. So diffusion wouldn't be very good across them. But these capillaries are tiny, tiny, tiny things, so that you can get lots of them in a small space inside your lungs. And they have really small walls, like really thin walls, as shown on this diagram. So that's going to help the diffusions about decreasing the distance that gas has to travel. So the correct answer here is that it's a capillary. So most of you got that right. Well done. Next question. How do the gases pass across the wall of the alveolus by, is it diffusion, evaporation, or fermentation? What do you think? I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Yeah, well done. So all of you are saying diffusion, and that would be correct. So it's just simple diffusion through the wall. Right, so more marks for this question. You get 2 marks for this question now. And the table compares the concentration of some gases in inhaled air and exhaled air. So they want you to complete the table below and write either lower or higher in each of the boxes. So they've completed one line as an example for you. So the water vapor in inhaled air, there's going to be a lower concentration of it. And in the exhaled air, there's going to be a higher concentration. So for carbon dioxide, do you think in inhaled air, it's going to be lower or higher? And then for exhaled air, do you think it's going to be lower or higher? Let's think about carbon dioxide. Yep, so I've had, good answers. So carbon dioxide in the inhaled air is going to be lower, and then in the exhaled air is going to be higher. So what do we think about oxygen in inhaled air and then oxygen in exhaled air? Absolutely, yeah. So oxygen is going to have a lot higher concentration in inhaled air, and then it's going to have a lower concentration in the exhaled air. So that's because you've breathed it in and there's high concentration outside, but then it's diffused across your capillaries, across your wall of your alveoli and into your capillaries. So then when you breathe out, you're going to breathe a lot less oxygen out. So there you go, there's your 2 answers. So you'd have to get a line correct to get a mark, and then you'd have to get the line correct for oxygen to get the next mark. So gas exchange is really important, and the main reason is because we need oxygen to survive. So oxygen, we breathe it in the air, it's all around, and the process that we need it for is called aerobic respiration. So aerobic means with oxygen, like with, using oxygen is aerobic. So does anyone want to just write down in the chat box to me and tell me what the equation is for respiration? So aerobic respiration, what 2 things do you need that you use, and what do these 2 things then produce? What do these 2 things then produce? That's why I've got a right answer already. Anyone else? What do you think? So what 2 things does aerobic respiration use? Giving you a clue at the top of this slide, saying something that we need. So that's one of the things already. Yep, a few answers coming in. Absolutely. So all mentioning the right sorts of things. So we're going to use glucose and oxygen. So glucose, little picture of sugar down there, but it's in lots of different things that you eat. So that's the way that you would get that into your body. And oxygen, as we've been talking about today, you'd breathe that in. they're going to do a little reaction inside your body, which is called respiration. And the things that they produce is carbon dioxide, water, and then energy. So the carbon dioxide is the gas that you breathe out on exhalation. You also breathe out this water, and it comes out as water vapor. So it's not a liquid, you would breathe the water out. And then energy, you can't actually see, but it's used in all of your cells in your body to do all sorts of things to keep you alive. So is that all right? Any questions about that? Just pop them in the chat box. There we go. So, as I said before, we need this energy that aerobic respiration produces for lots of different processes in the body. Now, there's some images on the right, just to give you some clues as to what they might be used for, this energy. Just want to pop a message to me about what different things you think this energy goes towards doing in the body. And use those diagrams on the right as a little bit of a hint about what you might think. So I've had, yeah. Yep, got some good answers coming in. Perfect, yeah. So had a couple of answers saying growth. So that's absolutely right. This diagram over here is highlighting that quite nicely. And we've had a few mentions of exercise, muscles. So specifically to do with that, it's contracting these muscles, so which you would do in exercising. So this energy can go towards movement, and contracting muscles is how you move. So that's really important for that as well. Muscle building has been mentioned, so that could link into the protein one. So this energy is really important for making proteins. So some of these proteins might go towards building muscle, but there's lots and lots of other proteins in your body as well, like DNA is a protein, lots and lots of proteins that energy is needed for. And then the final one, shown by that little thermometer at the bottom, it's really important in maintaining our body temperature. So our body has to be at very specific temperature in order to work properly. And this energy is really important for doing that. So there you are, contracting muscles, making proteins to grow, and also maintaining our body temperature. Let's move on. So what happens when we exercise? So when we exercise, our muscles are moving a lot more. So as I said before, when you're exercising, all your muscles in your body are going to be contracting. And muscle contraction requires respiration. So if you're doing more contraction, you need more respiration to occur. So if you need more respiration to occur, you need to breathe a lot faster. And that's because you need to be getting more oxygen in your body, and that oxygen can then be used in the respiration equation that we showed before, so oxygen and glucose. And the way that this oxygen reaches our muscles is via our blood vessels, and our heart is essential for beating our blood around our body. So your heart rate is also going to increase to try and pump your blood around your body faster, and to get that oxygen to reach those distant muscles, so they can do more respiration. So does that make sense? Is that all right? So during exercise, you're more active, you're going to do more respiration. And to do that, you need to breathe faster to get more oxygen into your body. And your heart needs to beat faster to pump the blood around your body a lot faster, so that the oxygen reaches your muscles. But sometimes when we exercise really intensely, So for example, if you're going to do a 100-meter sprint, so you're setting off really, really fast and your body's moving really fast, we can't physically breathe fast enough and get enough oxygen into our body for that to happen. So instead of aerobically respirating, we now undergo anaerobic respiration. So the word anaerobic means without oxygen. So you've got no oxygen anymore. Well, you do, but not enough oxygen. So your cells in your body are gonna start respiring without oxygen there. So if you remove oxygen from the respiration equation, the only thing you're left with is glucose at the start. Does anyone know, I don't know if you do know this yet, but does anyone know what glucose might break down into during anaerobic respiration? Perfect, got a right answer already. Anyone else have any ideas as well? You might have heard the term before. Yeah, so we've got a right answer. So your glucose is going to break down into something called lactic acid. And it's not very nice, lactic acid. It can start to build up in your muscles and it can make you feel quite sick and not very well. So the way that you need to get rid of lactic acid is to try and convert it into carbon dioxide and water that you can breathe out, that like what would happen in aerobic respiration. And this process produces something called an oxygen debt. And after we've stopped exercising, it needs to be paid back. So there's a nice graph that you can show for when you exercise. So on the left here, we've got oxygen consumption. So that's how much oxygen you're breathing in and taking in. Then along the bottom, it's just showing time moving along. So as we go further along this bottom axis, time's moving along. So the oxygen debt curve looks a bit like this. And this is just showing that as you start exercising, which is down here, so this is the beginning of exercise. As you start exercising, your oxygen consumption is going to rapidly go up because you're going to, for example, start running and you're going to breathe faster. I'm sure you all know that feeling of suddenly having to start breathing faster as you're exercising. So you're going to take in lots more oxygen. It's going to go up like that. Then you're going to reach a point where you're at a sort of a steady state point. So you're going to plateau here and you physically can't take in any more oxygen. You've reached your limit of the amount. There's only so fast you can breathe. There's only so much air that you can get into your lungs. So you're going to sort of reach this steady state point. And then you're going to finish your exercise here. You're going to stop exercising. Just there, sir. And you're very slowly going to slow down your oxygen consumption as you stop exercising and start to sort of cool down and feel a bit better. And this period here, from the point where you've stopped exercising and that of slowing down your breathing, is your recovery period. So that's where you're going to be breathing fast still, but it's going to be slowing down all the time. And that's where you're going to be trying to repay this oxygen debt. So you're going to be, this is the reason why when you finish exercising, you don't immediately stop breathing fast. You continue breathing fast and going down this slope for quite a bit of time after you've exercised, so you can get this oxygen into your body still and pay back this oxygen debt. And this extra oxygen that you're going to be getting into your body is going to help convert that lactic acid into carbon dioxide and water that you can breathe out. So it's going to get it out of your muscles and stop that horrible feeling. It doesn't feel very nice. So is that all right? Does anyone have any questions about that? Once you get your head around it, it's not too bad. But it's just sort of understanding that exercising, you can only like breathe fast up to a certain point, and after that point, you sort of reach a point where you physically cannot aerobically respire anymore. So using glucose and oxygen, your cells now would anaerobically respire and just use the glucose, build up this lactic acid, makes your muscles feel really sore and isn't very pleasant. But if you continue breathing fast after your exercise is finished, you'll go through this period of recovery, which allows you to convert this lactic acid into carbon dioxide and water and get it out of your system by breathing it out. So I hope that was all right, that section there. We've covered quite a bit, quite a few good exam questions, and talked a bit more in detail about what's going on a much smaller scale during inhalation and gas exchange. So we're going to have another 15-minute break, let's say. So we'll come back at 11:45, I think. And we'll run through the last part of today's lesson, which is applying things in a more clinical and real life context so you can understand how problems with breathing and respiration can affect people. Yeah, so if you have any questions during this break, please feel free to just drop me a message and I'll come back to them afterwards. But yeah, taking some more time to stretch your legs now, get another drink, get something else to eat, and we'll come back at 11:45. Okay, hi everyone again. So we're on to the last lesson of today now, which I'm sure you're all glad about, so you can go and enjoy your Saturday afternoon after this. We're going to talk about, as I said before, some sort of respiratory and problems with your lungs that people can have, so different conditions, things that can make your lung function worse. And we'll also do some exam questions just to make sure you're understanding things as we go along. So let's just start off by you guys just dropping me a message and telling me different diseases that you think people can have which can affect the way that we breathe. So have you heard of any different diseases that people can have? So one of them's really quite common, and I'm sure you'll know some family or friends with this. Yep, so people are giving me some answers. Any others that affect the way we breathe? Getting some really good answers through. Thanks, guys. Any others? Anything that you've ever heard before to do with the lungs or anything like that? Give you a few more seconds to have anyone else wants to have a think of some things. Yeah, so first answer I got was heart disease. So that's a really good one actually, and draws on a bit what we mentioned from the start about chest pain making you breathe slower because it's a bit more painful. So definitely heart disease could affect the way that you breathe. Yeah, in lots of different ways actually. So that's a really good point. That doesn't have to just be a problem with your lungs that can affect the way that you breathe. So a really common one, which a few of you have sent me a message about, is asthma. So I'm sure you all know at least one person that might have asthma. You can get asthma for a range of different reasons, but that's definitely going to affect the way that you are able to breathe in and then breathe out again. So someone's mentioned the condition pneumonia, in which a few of you might have heard of. So that's a type of infection that you can get in your lungs, where you get fluid inside due to this infection, and that can make it really difficult to breathe because obviously fluid and infection and all that sort of nasty stuff isn't really meant to be inside your lungs, inside those air sacs, those alveoli. Someone else has mentioned lung cancer, also a really good point. So that's a real structural thing that's going to affect the way that you're able to breathe. And if you've got these sort of tumours inside your lung. And another one someone's mentioned called bronchitis. Also, yeah. So that's sort of inflammation of those bronchi and bronchioles that we'd mentioned before. So yeah, that definitely will affect how you breathe. So that's really good. All of you already have got quite a good understanding of all these different conditions that can have an impact. So let's talk a little bit more about asthma in a bit more depth. So the reason that asthma makes changes the way that we breathe is it because it causes those airways to become a bit more narrow. So that's called constriction. Just written at the end there in red. So your trachea, which is just highlighting here, going down here, and just straight down here, if you follow that grey circle, and then the bronchi branching off either side. Each of these are going to become a lot narrower, and that's going to mean a lot less air can get inside your lungs. If you think about if you've got a really big tube and then suddenly you swap it to sort of a straw or something like that, it's suddenly become really difficult to get the same amount of air in. So that can be quite an uncomfortable sensation to have. Some of you might have heard the term asthma attack before. So that is sort of where the airways suddenly become quite inflamed. And do you know how we mentioned right at the start that your trachea, for example, has these rings of cartilage and then also these rings of muscle as well? So this inflammation that happens during an asthma attack can cause these muscles to contract, and that it's this contraction that's going to make these airways much narrower and make breathing more difficult. So what different things can we use to treat asthma? Has anyone ever heard of what we use to treat asthma? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So everyone's saying an asthma inhaler, which is absolutely right. Do you know how many different types of inhalers there are? I don't know if you guys know specifically. Yeah, so I've had answer 3. Generally, there's sort of 2 inhalers that are used to treat general asthma normally. So you might have heard people refer to them as this blue inhaler, and then you've got a brown inhaler as well. So, and they work very slightly differently. So the blue one is used if you have one of those attacks. So if your airways suddenly become really inflamed and constrict and go quite small, you would use that blue inhaler, and that's going to help to relax those airways and help you get some air back into your lungs a bit more easily. And then the brown inhaler works ever so slightly differently, because that's more about using it in the long term. So that's more about prevention and stopping the attacks happening in the first place. So if you've got quite good management of your asthma and you use this brown inhaler as often as the doctor tells you to, hopefully you wouldn't have to use the blue inhaler as much. Because the brown inhaler is preventing those attacks from happening. So someone's just mentioned in the chat, don't some severe allergies make your breather harder as well? So definitely allergies can make your breathing harder. And that's partly due to this inflammation that you get and this reaction inside your airways. They get all angry and they don't like whatever you're allergic to. So lots of people can get hay fever, people can be allergic to dust, all these sorts of things are going to, if you're allergic to them, irritate these airways and make them go smaller. Yeah, so absolutely that's right as well. So got a bit of an exam question here just to check your understanding. It says that figure 2, which is this picture below, shows cross sections of bronchioles of 2 different people. So the first one is a person without asthma, and they've highlighted for you that they've got relaxed muscle fibers inside one of their breathing tubes. And then on the right, there's a person with asthma, and they've highlighted for you that they've got contracted muscle fibers. So, and they want you to suggest why people with asthma might find it difficult to breathe. So it's just a 1-mark question. So you just need to put 1 point down. If you just send me a message with why you think people with asthma sometimes find it more difficult to breathe. And it's a good idea to use the diagram to help you with your answer. Yeah, I've got some really good answers coming through. Okay, so I'll run through some of the answers that I've got. So I've had the muscle fibers are tightening the space for the air passage to stay in, and it's limiting the space was another answer I got. So that's absolutely right. You've got narrower, smaller air passages, bronchioles. And then someone else has said because there isn't enough air passage for the oxygen. So, and then that's the second point you could get a mark for, less air, oxygen can pass through. So with the first point, I would just be careful that you mention the keywords that they're looking for. So they either want you to mention air passages, so passages, or be more specific and say bronchioles. You can't just say there isn't enough space for air, if you see what I mean. They want you to say where specifically, so in the passages, in the bronchioles. Someone's mentioned the answer, their lungs are smaller. So it's not that your lungs are changing at all in terms of structurally, in terms of size. It's asthma and is more to do with the tubes that are connecting to your lungs, and it's those, the middle bit where the air passes through, it's that's getting smaller. So it's like, instead of having a hose pipe sized hole for your air to pass down and get into your lungs, suddenly you're only using a straw, and it's really difficult all of a sudden to get the air. That would obviously be a really extreme case. But suddenly it's become really, really difficult to get the air into their lungs. So there are 5.4 million people with asthma in the UK. So once you to tell them what type of disease is asthma. What do you think it is? Do you want to just pop me a message? So is it an allergy? Is it a bacterial infection, a type of cancer, or is it a viral infection? What do you think? We haven't really touched on this yet. We did a tiny little bit just before, but just give it your best shot and just drop me a message what you think. Okay, we've not had any answers, so I'm guessing people aren't quite. Oh, I've had one answer, a viral infection. So it's not a type of infection, asthma. You would class asthma as a type of allergy. So we briefly touched on it before, where I was mentioning hay fever and dust. People can have allergies to that. And the dust allergy could cause someone to have asthma, to do with the dust. The hay fever could cause someone to have asthma. So the dust could cause someone's airways to become restrict and become really narrow. So that would be asthma. So it is A is the answer. It's a type of allergy. A bacterial infection or a viral infection, that would require either a type of bacteria entering or a type of a virus entering and causing sort of an infection inside. And then it's not a cancer, which no one mentioned that answer, because cancer is something completely different. So yeah, this answer would be number A. So asthma is a type of allergy reaction. So let's now talk about smoking. Right, so smoking can damage the lungs. I'm sure you've all probably know that. Smoking isn't very good for you. But not only can it affect the lungs, it can also cause problems to your heart and cause lots of different cancers as well. So generally, it's just not very good for you. And in top of that, cigarettes also contain something called nicotine, and that's a really addictive substance. So that's why when people start smoking, they often find it really difficult to then stop, which then makes the chances of them having problems with their lungs and their heart and all these cancers more likely, because they're really struggling to stop smoking. So these substances that are inside the cigarettes are affecting our brain. And yeah, this is why people have cravings, and lots of people tend to depend on these substances and find it really difficult to stop. So this animation here is just trying to illustrate how smoking might affect our lungs. So I'll pop some headings up. So inside our lungs, there's usually this sticky mucus stuff. So it's often found down your trachea, so that big airway coming from your mouth, down the bronchi and down the bronchioles. There should be this sticky sort of mucus stuff. And this mucus traps pathogens, so bacteria, viruses, nasty things that shouldn't be in your airway. This mucus is going to stick to it and get hold of it and stop it traveling all the way down into your lungs. And to get this mucus that's now caught this nasty pathogen out of your airway, you have these tiny little hairs, which you can just about see over here, these pink things which are moving and wafting about here. They're called cilia. And these line special cells on your trachea, your bronchi, and your bronchioles. And as you can see here, they sort of waft up and down. And that wafting action is going to push the mucus up and away from your lungs, and then it eventually comes up and into your mouth, and you swallow it, which sounds a bit gross, but it's a really useful process for stopping these bacteria and these pathogens from getting inside your lungs and causing really nasty infections. And the way that smoking affects this process is that it's the cigarette smoke which contains these really harmful chemicals that actually damages these cells with the tiny hairs on. So if you've damaged these tiny little hairs that's wafting the mucus, all of a sudden you get this buildup of nasty, horrible mucus sort of sitting in your airways, which can be quite uncomfortable for people. And so the only way that they can bring this mucus up and get it out of their airways and clear their airways is to cough it out. And so that's why people who smoke are often associated with having a cough, and it's called a smoker's cough, quite a distinctive sound. And that's due to them having to physically clear their airways of mucus themselves, because the cigarette smoke has damaged these tiny little hairs, the cilia, that is meant to be doing it for them. So, looking more specifically at how smoking affects our lungs, I've got a diagram here of a normal alveoli on the or alveolus on the left, which should look like, it looks sort of like a bunch of grapes, really. All these like bundles of tiny air sacs, which are all grouped together, and they've got these nice walls in between them. So you've got lots of, as we were talking about before, lots of surface area for this gas exchange to be taking place. But if you look on the right at this smoker's alveolus, all of a sudden, I'm sure you can see that these walls have disappeared. They're not there anymore, and you just sort of have this big open space in the middle. And if you don't have these walls, you're going to decrease the surface area inside this alveolus. So let's just put these notes up. So as we said, smoking also breaks down the walls of the alveoli, and that forms these larger air spaces. And this in turn is going to make the efficiency of gas exchange a lot worse, because there isn't this, it's all about surface area, there isn't this big surface area for gas exchange to be taking place anymore. So this means that people who smoke get a lot less oxygen into their blood, and that can make things like exercise, very basic things like just walking up the stairs, quite difficult for them. Sort of like me and you, quite easy to walk up the stairs, in terms of sort of getting oxygen into your blood at like the right amount of oxygen. But for someone who might smoke and has damaged their alveoli, it can be quite difficult for them to get enough oxygen in. So if you have any questions of going through, please don't hesitate to message me, by the way. I can stop at any point. And just to recap anything, we're doing really well on time as well. So we'll definitely be finished before 1 o'clock, which I'm sure you'll all be glad about. So the diagram below shows an alveolus from a healthy lung and an alveolus from a damaged lung. So on the left, all these like indents, lots of surface area on the left. Alveolus from a damaged lung looks slightly different. So they want you to tick which one of the following is a difference between the alveolus from the damaged lung and the alveolus from the healthy lung. So is it A, the damaged alveolus has a smaller surface area? Is it B, the damaged alveolus has a shorter diffusion pathway? Or is it C, the damaged alveolus has a better blood supply? So which do you think it is? Just drop me a message quickly. A, B, or C? So a difference between the healthy one and the damaged one. Be a good idea to use the diagram as well. What can you sort of see looking at that diagram? Bit of exam technique. If an examiner puts a picture in a question for you, a bit like this one, where they've been quite nice and shown you a photo of a healthy alveolus and a damaged alveolus, they've 9 times out of 10, well, 10 times out of 10, they've put it there for a reason, because they want you to look at it and they want you to use it, and sort of giving you a bit of a hint as to what the answer might be. So the answer in this case is let's click, number A. So the damaged alveolus is a smaller surface area. So the reason that is, so I've had a few answers saying D and C, not D and C, B and C. So looking at these two diagrams above, we can't actually see if the damaged alveolus is a shorter diffusion pathway, because the diffusion pathway is all about the distance through the wall, through that journey through there, and through that journey through there. And if you look at both diagrams, the thickness of the line, sort of highlighting the wall of the alveolus, is the same in both diagrams. So that wouldn't be affecting the diffusion pathway. It's the same. And then for C, the damaged alveolus has a better blood supply. Well, we also can't see that either. And smoking or this damaged lung, it's not affecting the capillary supply, and so the blood supply around the alveolus. This diagram is showing that the damaged alveolus doesn't have as many indents as the healthy one. So on this healthy one, there's these really big indents coming in here and here and here, going quite deep into the alveolus. And what that is doing, it's increasing the surface area. So instead of the damaged one just sort of wiggling around here, not going in very deep, there's not much surface area for gas exchange to take place, compared to this healthy lung, which has got all this space in here, and then all the way back out, and then all the way back in, and then all the way back out. There's loads of area for gas exchange to take place. So the main difference between these two would be that there's a much smaller surface area in the damaged lung. So hopefully that makes sense now. So we've got another exam question. A person with a damaged alveoli finds exercising difficult. Which one of the following is the reason why the damaged alveoli will make exercising difficult? So is it less carbon dioxide is taken in, less energy is needed for exercise, or less oxygen is taken in? What do you think it is? Just send me a message with either A, B, C. Give you a few more seconds to have a think about it. So the answer is going to be that less oxygen is taken in. So option C. Oh, sorry. Oh, they've put the wrong letter there, but it's option C, as you can see. Less oxygen is taken in. That should just say C here instead of B. Yeah, so that's because these damaged alveoli, as was mentioned in the last question, have got a smaller surface area. So there's less space for this oxygen to be diffusing across the wall. So they will just be getting less oxygen into their blood. The damaged alveoli doesn't have any impact on how much energy is needed for exercise. And for option A, we don't want carbon dioxide in. We want to be removing carbon dioxide, so that wouldn't be correct either. So on to the last few slides now. So just looking at lung cancer, which was mentioned at the start, having an effect on your lung function. So cigarette smoke contains something called tar, and it is this tar which causes cancer. So things that cause cancer are called carcinogens. And because this cigarette smoke contains the tar, anything that this tar touches is going to have an increased risk of getting cancer. So that includes your mouth, because you breathe the smoke in there, and then down your throat and your trachea, and then also then into your lungs as well. The tar will fill up your lungs. So if you just look down here, just looking at these two photos, this healthy lung and then this tar-filled lung, there's a really big difference between what they look like. One of them is black, as you can see on the right. It's all black and looks all a bit sticky, but the one on the left is sort of, it's got a few black patches, but generally nice and pink and looks quite healthy. So what do you think going on inside the alveoli? What do you think would be the main difference between these two? So this is looking at the outside of the lung, but what do you think would be going on inside the alveoli? Do I just drop me a message? Yeah, so not enough oxygen is taken in through them. That's the right answer. So these alveoli, not only are their walls going to have been damaged by the cigarette smoke, and they're going to have a lot less surface area, but they've now got this horrible black sticky tar in there as well, and both of these are just going to massively reduce the amount of oxygen that can be taken in. Okay, last exam question of today. So animals and plants contain organs and tissues. So figure 1 shows some organs in the human thorax. So the human thorax is sort of the top part of your body. It sort of includes your chest. So it's where your lungs sit, where your heart sits. And they just want you to label part A, part B, and then part C as well. So if you all just send me a message and just say A is this, B is that, C is this. Got a couple of answers coming in, just keep them coming. Last question, so last chance to sort of make sure you really understood what we've gone over today. I'll just give you another minute or so to have a think. Write your answer down and drop me a message. Okay, so part A. So that would be, I've got part A is correct, yeah. So the answer that I've got are right. So that would be a bronchus. And it's not bronchi because it's not two of them. But we'll have a look at the answer in a sec, because they are quite nice and they do allow different answers. But the best answer to this question would be A is a bronchus. And then B, I've got the right answer again, so that's the trachea. And then part C, again, that was correct. We have the alveolus. So let's just have a look what they'll allow. So for your part A, the bronchus, they will allow you to have bronchi, even though that's technically the plural, and they're only pointing at one. But it does show that you know what it is and you're in the right place. And they have also said that they would allow bronchiole as well, which is just that smaller division of the bronchus. But in this case, bronchus is the best answer. Trachea, they've said that they'll allow windpipe. But if you do know the sort of technical scientific names for things, I would use them in your exam. just because of that, I mean, it's more of a correct answer than windpipe. And then alveolus, they've said that you could have the plural alveoli, but for this one, they do want you to give the actual scientific name, so they wouldn't let you say air sac, which is why it's important to sort of use the scientific name. Some questions they might allow you to use the word air sac. Some questions like this one, they wouldn't. So it's better if you know the scientific word to just use that as much as possible. So just to finish off, last little bit, just going to talk to you very quickly for a few minutes about something more medically related, something a bit more related to real life. So as I said at the start of the this lesson today, I'm in my 3rd year of medical school now. I've just started. And I've been started going on placement a lot more as well. So that's me going into the hospitals and being on the wards. And one of the big things, there's a couple of sort of skills that you learn in 3rd year, which are really useful when you're on the wards and you're trying to look after patients. I'm just going to talk a bit about one of those. So does anyone know what this blue thing is that's wrapped around someone's arm? Anyone got any guesses what that might be? Might not have heard the word before. If you don't know what it is, could you maybe have a guess of what you think it might be doing, or why we might put it on someone's arm like that? Any guesses? So if you look at it, it's quite tight on someone's arm. Absolutely, I've got a right answer. So someone said to stop the blood from flowing, and that is absolutely right. So this blue thing is called a tourniquet, and you tie it onto someone's arm quite tightly, and it will be quite uncomfortable for the patient because you are squeezing their arm a bit, but that's going to really stop the blood flowing down their arm and back up their arm, importantly. So it's going to make the blood stay in the bottom of their arm. So next question, does anyone know what these are? Any ideas? It's a bit like say what you see. You probably have a part of a guess of what part of it is. Yeah, so I've had needle as in a needle, yeah. So there is a needle on here, that's absolutely right. This part here, I'm just highlighting with my grey circle. That's a needle here, and then here's the needle as well. So these are all part of the same device, and they're sort of slotted inside each other to make this whole thing at the end. So these two things here, this thing, and then this thing here, are sort of slotted on top of each other to make this bigger thing. And you would put that into someone's arm or into the back of their hand, and that's going to give you access straight into their blood supply and into their vein. So this thing's called a cannula, and that would stay in someone's arm for a few hours or as long as it's required for. Has anyone ever heard of a cannula or know why it might be used? If you've got a direct blood access to someone's blood vessels, why might that be useful? Doesn't matter if you don't know the answer. This is all just extra knowledge, this bit. Yeah, so to test their blood, it could be used for that. Yeah, because that would be really useful if you've got a sample of their blood to see what is going on. That would probably be more done with a needle, just a needle straight into their vein. This device is really useful for putting things into people's blood. So if you need to get medication into them, some sort of medicine, and if they've got a problem, you've got direct access into their blood supply and you can get medications in there really fast so they can start working. So the reason this tourniquet is really important is that it stops the blood flowing down out of your arm, makes your blood vessels pop up nicely because they're all full of blood, and so they go really fat. And then it's really easy for you to then pop this cannula in, and you can see their blood vessels really easily. Pop the cannula in, give them whatever medication they need, and then hopefully they'll be on the mend. So that was just a little bit of extra info about something a bit more clinical, something a bit more about what I've learned how to do this year, being on placement. And if some of you are thinking about medicine in the future, something that you'll definitely be doing quite a lot as well. So that's the end of today's lesson. I really hope it was useful for you all, and that you learned something from it, or that you just consolidated what you already knew, just made everything a bit easier to understand. We finished a bit earlier than normal, so I'll stick around for a little bit if anyone has got any questions that they want to ask, and I'm more than happy to stay and answer any about anything, about what we've gone through today, the gas exchange, or just generally about being at uni, doing medicine, what I do on medicine. If anyone's interested, just stick around and ask me in the chat and we can talk about it. But if not, you're all free to go. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a nice rest of your Saturday.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. That's all right.